The Computer by Rene Morris. The day had started the same as any other day, with sunlight pouring in at the window and the faint aroma of bacon frying. Amon Cain stretched his long legs beneath the warm blanket and tried to think of nothing, but his mind had already started to dwell on the day's business, and try as he might, he knew that sleep was impossible. He threw back the covers and grudgingly slid out of bed, washed and dressed, and, still yawning, went down into the kitchen. Tanya turned to smile at him as he entered, setting the plate she was holding down upon the table in front of him. "Thought you were never coming," she said, still smiling. Amon stared at his plate for a moment, savouring the rich fragrance that rose up, filling him with ravenous hunger, and then bit deeply into the soft pink bacon, sighing contentedly. "Oh, before I forget," Tanya said, "there's a letter for you. It's marked personal. It was delivered by hand." Amon looked up quickly. "When did it come?" 10 minutes ago. Another business appointment cancelled, I expect." He took the thin blue envelope from her and stared at it. His name and address were printed in capital letters, and in the bottom left-hand corner his thumb felt the pattern of perforated dots. He rose from the table, a cold knot tightening inside his stomach as he went slowly up to his room. He closed the door and sat on the bed, staring at the envelope, half afraid to open it, yet knowing that he must. With trembling hands, he tore carefully along the top and pulled out the small white card. The words swam before his eyes, and he could not read them because his hand was not steady. He placed the card upon the bed and, kneeling down, read slowly. "Eminent Citizen Amon Cain, Number 27681. Subject, male, 5 feet 10, blonde hair, blue eyes, limp in left foot. Name, Anton Kepler. Crime, murder. Address, 2 Faraway Block, Cedar Way. Exterminate, 4:15, Tuesday, August 5th, 2100. Card to be returned on completion of duty. Special Computer Branch. Number 50021. It seemed incredible that the computer had chosen his number, and yet, as an eminent citizen, he knew that one day he would be called upon to rid society of its unwanted. After all, he had agreed that it was far better to rely on the computer, for its accuracy was infallible. It was decided that trial by jury could not affect the same speed and humanity in dealing with its unlawful, as could the computer. He recalled the long, low room with its flickering panels of red and green light, and the strange, abrupt spinning of tape as it tugged on brown reels behind polished glass. He had felt a sense of awe as he watched the needles quiver on their white dials, recording time and place, sex, and intensity of human feeling. Within an hour, the computer had picked up and analysed the shock and fear waves that sped across the domed city, pinpointing the exact source and following the mental disturbance with unerring precision. He had been one of 12, each man chosen by the computer to act on behalf of society. Why should he feel any guilt? It was in the order of things that he should obey. In fact, his duty. Somewhere a man had killed. Amon wondered about the man, wondered if his morning had started like any other. Did he know that at 4:15 today, yes, today, he would die? There was no escape. It was no use trying to run or hide, for the computer knew where he would be at 4:15, had already sorted and sifted his brain pattern within the cold consciousness of its own. Already the body of the victim would have been removed, and every minute detail of death recorded and filed away in the memory bank. He had to admit that there could not be a better way. Kepler would not know his executioner, but at the moment of death the computer would flicker and blink his soul into the memory bank of eternity. Amon picked up the small white card that ordered death and slipped it back inside the envelope. He stood for a moment looking for a hiding place, somewhere he knew it would be safe, but decided that to leave it anywhere in the room would be dangerous. Above all, he did not wish Tanya to know of his mission. How could she understand? How could he explain the complexity of man and machine? He placed the envelope deep inside his pocket and went down to Tanya. "I'm off now, darling," he said, trying to sound as he always did. Tanya came from the kitchen and, reaching up, kissed him for a long time on the mouth. He tried to respond, but somehow the shock of the letter had sapped him of all feeling, and he could only stand there, waiting for her to release him. "Have you got everything?" He felt his pocket. Had he got everything? Somewhere at the back of his mind he was suddenly aware that there was something that he had forgotten. The gun. It came to him in a flash. How could he have forgotten such a vital part of it? He sped back up the stairs to his room and unlocked the drawer of the writing desk. His hand felt inside and touched cold steel. It was not like any other gun he had ever seen, and as it lay on the palm of his hand, he found it hard to believe that so small an object could spurt liquid death inside a man's brain. Although he had handled it many times when being taught how to use it, he still felt that it could not possibly kill, for there was no mark, to speak of, on the target sheet. Today he would point it at a man's head and fire. He would feel the small weapon jerk in his hand, and watch a man fall dead, with only a tiny pinprick of blue somewhere on his forehead. He took the card from his pocket and stood wondering if it would not be better to leave it here, in the drawer, but decided he had better take it with him, so he could read the address again. That way there would be no mistakes. Amon pressed the green button and waited for the autopath to slow down. He stood watching the thin line of people as they were hurried by, their faces blank and white as if they were dead, without the senses of living, feeling, or caring. And he envied them their isolation, while all the time his stomach tightened and the muscles of his face grew stiff. The autopath slowed to walking pace, and he stepped on. He tried to think of the new autopath that had just been completed downtown. It was a vast improvement on the old type, and he knew it was the best thing he had ever designed. Today, at 4 o'clock, he would be travelling on it, taking death to Kepler. Everything seemed so normal. His secretary greeted him in the usual brisk manner, coughing discreetly as she placed the mail in front of him and waited silently until he had finished. She smiled as he looked up, and he wondered if she had detected anything on his face. "Oh, Elise, before I forget, I shall be off at 4 today. Better leave the teletape on in case anyone rings." "Yes, Mr. Kane. Anything else?" "No, I don't think so," Amon said thoughtfully. And then, "Oh yes, there's an electrical fault on the new line. Have it attended to, will you, Elise?" "Yes, Mr. Kane, it will be seen to today. It's only a minor fault." Amon nodded. Elise went out quietly, closing the door behind her, and he tried to think of something that would bring her back again. He needed to talk to somebody with normal fears, anything to take his mind off Kepler and the damned computer. But he knew that it would not be normal to take Elise away from her work at this time, and he wanted everything to be normal. It was expected of him. So much was expected of him. The hours crept by, and he watched the fingers of time move slowly and silently, eating away the precious minutes of life. In the long, low room, the computer would be flickering hungrily, waiting for the stimulant of shock waves to set the tapes turning, and the searching fingers dancing inside the framework of white dials. It was impossible not to think about it. What did the computer know about conscience? And, suddenly, it did not seem right that it could order death by another's hand without feeling anything at all. Would he ever be able to forget? Would he, in time, just store the memory of it somewhere at the back of his mind, like the computer? His gaze turned again to the fingers of time. They had grown larger, blacker, and the hour hand had almost reached 4 o'clock. He stared in disbelief. Where had the time gone? What had he done with it? What had Kepler done with it? Had he wasted it away as he had done, or had he fled from place to place, trying to hide his guilt away from the computer? Damn the computer! If he ever saw it again, he would smash it to pieces with his bare hands. But the time had come to carry out his mission, and he knew that he must. It was too late to alter anything now. He had agreed, along with the others, that this was the best way. The best way for whom? The computer? Kepler? Certainly not him. He felt as if he were walking in his sleep. People jostled past in waves as they came off the main town autopath. He moved with the crowd, hardly aware of what he was doing. The autopath started to move forward, and he was hemmed in on all sides by swaying bodies. In the distance, the red lights flashed destinations, and the button beneath his finger felt round and hard, and he took his hand away for fear of pressing it before his sign came up. The autopath stopped and started, with people surging on and off every 2 or 3 minutes as they neared the city centre. But gradually, as they left the city behind, the crowd thinned a little, and the street names flashed less frequently. Then suddenly Cedar Way flashed in the distance, and he was pressing the small hard button beneath his thumb. The autopath slowed and stopped, and he stepped off onto the pavement and looked about him for the large block of flats. He felt only the queer kind of sickness that rose up inside his throat, and the hard knot of nerves cramping his stomach. He looked up at the vast building before him. It had the same block shape as all the others he had designed, fitting perfectly inside the straight, orderly streets that he had taken so much trouble to leave uncluttered. He entered the huge building and stood for a while staring at the white walls, and the entrance at the other end of the corridor that opened out into another street. The caretaker's door stood open, but there was no one inside. Amon took the small gun from his pocket and released the safety catch. He walked stiffly, his hand trembling, and cold sweat standing out on his forehead. Outside number 2, he stopped. It was difficult to control the trembling, and he swallowed the sickness that welled up in his throat like a surging tide, while his mind fought to accept the thing that he was about to do. Leaning against the white wall, he stood with ears straining, trying to hear a movement inside the room. But there was no sound except for the wild hammering of his heart, and the short, sharp intake of his own breath. Amon steadied himself. The clock on the wall above the door pointed to 4:15. Not a minute, more or less. Raising his hand, he knocked loudly on the blue panelling, the dull echo losing itself along the corridor. Everything was still. Then, from somewhere inside came the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps, and he could hear the uneven tread of Kepler. He waited, frozen. As slowly the door opened to reveal a short, fair-haired man. He stared at Amon curiously, his eyes moving from face to gun, questioning, and quickly turning to fearful terror. Amon felt his finger tighten on the trigger. Kepler stood for a moment, staring at him in disbelief, and then he seemed to crumple like a piece of rag. He fell to the floor and lay twitching, his hands still clutching his head, his worn-out slippers half off. God! He was dead. It was over. For Kepler and for him. He felt weak and spent with mental exhaustion. He wanted to move away from the sight of Kepler, but his legs would not obey. His hand reached out and gripped the handle of the door, closing it, blotting out the sight of Kepler. Somewhere along the corridor came footsteps. Amon turned to see an old man in overalls walking towards him. The old man stopped when he saw Amon, a toothy grin on his wrinkled face. "Is he out then?" Amon heard himself answering. "Yes, it looks like it. I'll come back later." "I don't think he'll be long," the old man went on. "There's a seat over there if you want to wait. I'm just going to fix this." Amon nodded and went stiffly across to the long leather seat, hardly aware of what he was doing. All that he could think about was Kepler, just lying there, dead. He needed to rest a while, and he sank down on the seat, his mind in turmoil. Vaguely, he watched the old man fumbling inside his pockets, watched while he sorted the odd shapes in his hand, and the screwdriver working at the blue panel of the door. After a while, he returned the screwdriver to his overall pocket and looked over at Amon. "Never knew a man that bangs doors like this one. Mind you, you'd think that in this day and age they'd have something a bit more durable. I suppose the chap that built this place wanted glass. No good for numbers though. Cracks, you see." Amon nodded, and the old man moved on up the corridor and disappeared into the caretaker's office. He stood up, staring at the number plate, cold disbelief in his face. There was a naught after the 2. It was number 20. Number 20. Stumbling to the opposite door, he traced the numbers with a trembling hand. 21. Cold fear gripped him, and the numbers swam round and round inside his head, merging and spinning. He had killed the wrong man. Killed the wrong man. And then he was laughing. He couldn't stop laughing. The computer was not infallible after all. It was only as good as people. It was useless. In the long, low room, the computer fought desperately with the strange patterns of signals, flickering panels of light flashing hurriedly to sift the information, and the black fingers spun on the white dials. A small white card dropped into the viewer. It read, "Amon Kane, number 27681. Information unknown. Computer faulty." The flickering lights faded, and the reels of brown tape tugged convulsively behind polished glass, as quietly the computer turned itself off.